What's going on, you guys? It's your boy Patrick, aka Addicted to Combat, back for another week of UFC action. We've got UFC Vegas 77 this week, featuring an Apex card headlined by the women's bantamweights. Former champion Holm, as she takes on rising contender Mayra Bueno Silva. 14 fights on this card at this point. The 14th fight was just added recently in the past day. Jack Della Maddelena will now be on this card. He was supposed to fight last week. Now he faces a debuting fighter named Hafez. So I have broken down that fight. I will be talking about all 14 on this video. So hit the like, hit the subscribe, and yeah, I mean, we're coming off of a pretty profitable week. Hit 6.9 units of profit last week. Got every single bet correct that I posted on that Best Bets and Props video. So I couldn't have been more happy with last week's results, but it's never the time to celebrate too much. You know, it's back to business. We've got another 14-fight card to try to analyze, and it's a tough one here. There's a lot of fighters, not the highest level of talent in this card, and it's a lot of fighters that are newer to the UFC and possibly looking for their first victory. So 3 debuting fighters, 3 fighters coming off of 2 or more years of layoff time, and we've got a lot of spots where I'm going, look, I want to pick this bad fighter over this worse fighter. I should probably just not bet the fight. So there are some violent spots and some overs and unders I like on this card. I'll point those out, and I'll point out the 2 money lines I have placed so far. But join me on Wednesday night at 9 p.m. Central Time right here on this channel. I'll be going live with one of my favorite guests. We're going to have Monk back on from the MMA Monk Maddox channel and the MMA Engine. Since this is not the most exciting card and not one of my favorites betting-wise, I will be playing a lot more Draftkings this week, and who better than the genius himself, the Monkmatician, will guide us through the DFS side of things. I'll try to learn and follow along since I'm a beginner at that aspect of betting, and I'll talk about the betting with you guys in the live chat. So it'll be a fun back and forth. Love talking to Monk. He's got the statistics and just a great mind for making money on this sport. So again, hit the like, hit the subscribe, and let's break into the first prelim of UFC Vegas 77. First fight of the night is at women's bantamweight. We've got Ashley Evans-Smith taking on Eileen Perez. And it's a totally different skill set between these two women, in my opinion. You've got Ashley Evans-Smith, 36 years old at this point, returning after an over 2.5-year-long layoff. She's got a 6-5 professional record, which for these standards today looks pretty terrible, coming off of back-to-back losses. Her last fight was against Norma Dumont back in like 2020, where she got outstruck pretty much all 3 rounds. So, you know, the long layoff was due to a 14-month USADA suspension and some injuries. And I know people always make a big deal about these USADA suspensions when the fighter returns. Will they look the same, you know, off the drug potentially? This is a very, more of a technicality than it is like an actual drug. She got popped for DHEA, which is largely an over-the-counter supplement. Nothing that can cause really a super physiological effect on her. So the reason she got a long suspension was because it was a repeat offense. She had been caught with a banned diuretic in her debut. So nothing to worry about there with the USADA suspension, but she is, you know, coming off of an over 2.5-year-long layoff and didn't look good before she made that hiatus. So dropping back-to-back losses to Andrea Lee, largely outstruck, and Norma Dumont outstruck in that one as well. But she is a clean technical striker, more than she is like a grappler or wrestler. She's had most of her success kind of sticking and moving from the outside and getting her point fighting done that way. Eileen Perez is kind of the opposite, right? She likes to brawl more than be technical. She's a very physically strong woman from the Argentinian regional scene who just dropped her debut last September to just a better grappler in Stephanie Eggers. So, of course, Perez likes to throw big looping strikes, spinning attacks. Her kicks are actually pretty technical, but she wants to get the fight towards the cage, clinch up, get the body lock, and take you down to the mat. And then she'll get some strong top control, rain down ground and pound and elbows, and try to end the fight that way. Her regional scene resume in Samurai Fight House back in Argentina, not very strong. I think 5 out of her 8 opponents pre-UFC did not have a professional win. So not a whole lot you can draw from that, but you can draw from that her game plan, which is, again, to get in close, you know, brawl up close, close the distance, and take you down and control you on the mat. I think she could do it here against Ashley Evans-Smith. You know, Smith has been regressing even before this long layoff. She's now 36 years old. I think she'll have the better movement laterally. She'll have better footwork. But, again, I think Eileen Perez is going to override that technique with pure aggression and physicality. So give me Perez. The problem is the money line is a little bit wide. Like, I would probably cap Perez around -140, -150 here. But she's a minus 190 favorite. Not much I can do with that. Ashley Evans-Smith, a plus 165 underdog. She could easily come through, and I wouldn't be surprised, but just nothing I can really trust with all of these factors going against her here. So give me Eileen Perez. I think she either gets a ground and pound knockout at some point at the end of the fight, or just goes on more likely to win a decision. Lightweight bout up next between Carl Deaton and the returning Alex Munoz. This is another fighter in Munoz coming off of an over 2-year-long layoff. We haven't seen Munoz since he dropped his second loss in a row in the UFC, a very close split decision result that didn't go his way against Luis Pena. That was all the way back in April of 2021, and since then, the wrestler from Team Alpha Male, Alex Munoz, had to deal with some injuries. I think maybe rehabbing a knee injury for a long period of time now, so he's a very good fighter. His athletics are very good, his speed and footwork are solid. Striking, it's kind of stiff, like that wrestle boxing style. He just throws the big overhand right, throws some leg kicks, which would do him well in this match. But his lateral movement and footwork is pretty good, and he shoots a very fast takedown, very good at getting him off the cage as well. So not the most dangerous guy in Munoz, but his technique in his wrestling is strong, his top pressure is strong, and his cardio holds up over 3 rounds. He takes on Carl Deaton, who's a journeyman fighter who just made his debut unsuccessfully in February against Joe Selecki, who outgrappled him. I think the match lasted like 9 minutes, and I think Joe Selecki had about 9 minutes of control time before getting that submission at the end of round 2. Carl Deaton does have a lot of pro fights, though, outside the UFC. He's like 17 wins, 6 losses, 2 no contests, I believe is his record. And he's a guy who's got a well-rounded skill set. He's not great anywhere. He's kind of awkward everywhere, but his striking has some tricks to it, just very fundamental boxing, but he can use some pull counters, have some good movement that way. On the ground, he does like to take the fight to the mat and get into scrambles. And he does jump submission over position and ends up on bottom. He makes a lot of mistakes that he can get away with at the level of competition he's been facing. But at the UFC level, it's not going to work. And I think he'll just end up on bottom if he tries to jump submissions the way he does. The highest profile fighter Carl Deaton fought before Joe Selecki was former UFC power striker Justin James, who Carl Deaton defeated over 3 rounds and just controlled him and did not allow him to get that power going the whole time. So, yeah, I mean, Carl Deaton's a plus 135 underdog here. Alex Munoz, the minus 155 favorite. I can understand this line just from the perspective that, you know, there's a lot of question marks coming back with the 0-2 in the UFC record of Alex Munoz. But I would make him a bigger favorite here. I think he's got a big speed advantage. He's not the most dangerous guy, but just the way his striking looks, I think he can hit the target faster in this matchup, and just everything will lead to the takedowns, lead to the control time, and lead to a dominant decision win for Alex Munoz, in my opinion. Munoz is 0-2 in the UFC from a couple years ago. Nasrat Haqparast, pretty well-rounded guy, at least at that level of competition for a debuting fighter. Able to stuff the takedowns and make him strike. Munoz was not up for it that night. Luis Pena, very good at scrambling on the mat. He was able to avoid getting pinned there for parts of the round, and was able to do some striking with his tall, rangy physique at that point in time. But still a very close split decision that I thought should have gone Munoz's way with his control time and his striking success. So I'm taking Munoz here. I put 1.5 units on his money line at minus 150. It's currently just around that same price point, minus 150, minus 160. Give me Munoz to win a dominant decision here, using his wrestling to score probably a 3-round decision, winning every single round. Flyweight bout up next between the veteran Tyson Nam as he welcomes a debuting undefeated prospect, Azat Maksum. Now, Azat Maksum, 28 years old, pretty big for the weight class, just like Tyson Nam, and he's 16-0, undefeated record with 5 knockouts, 7 submissions. He is 4-0 in decision results. Maksum is a Kazakhstan fighter, very well-rounded with power for 125, like one-punch knockout power for the weight class, good athleticism, and a good grappling game as well. He comes out of Brave CF, where, of course, he was undefeated, and Octagon over in the regional scene in Europe and Kazakhstan. So, yeah, I like what I see from Azat Maksum. He's got the ability to just stay in constant motion, and his power does extend not only in round 1, but all the way to the end of the fight as well. And he stays in motion, feinting pretty much everything, faking level changes, faking strikes to set up better combinations, and then eventually get the fight to the mat if need be. So able to expose the weaknesses of his opponents, and for Azat Maksum, he really doesn't have too many. I will say my criticism of him is he is a very patient striker, knowing he can have that equalizing power. He is a kind of low output with the striking at times. But Tyson Nam, he can be the exact same way. That's really what his game is. It's a one-dimensional power puncher, 39 years old, which is old for the weight class. He's been a pro since, I want to say, like 2006, 2008. I remember seeing him back in Elite XC, which was back in 2008. It was a long time ago. But since then, he's gone 3-4 in the UFC. All three of those victories, not over the highest level of competition, but they are all under 1.5 round knockouts. Ode Osborne last year, Zaruk Adashev, and Jerome Rivera are those three finishes for Tyson Nam in the UFC, but he's lost decisions to Matt Schnell, Kai Kara France, Sergio Pettis, I think Zalga Zumagulov pre-UFC, and he's coming off of the first inside the distance loss in a while at the hands of Bruno Silva, where he got kicked in the face, did Tyson Nam, and then choked out in round 2. So that was the first time he was finished inside the distance in a long, long time. Normally very tough, and people fear his power coming back their way. But low output. So, look, this could be a staring contest for the first few parts of round 1 between these two competitors that respect each other's power. Nobody wants to make the big mistake. But I think it is going to be Azat Maksum who goes in there and just puts together more striking output. He does like to be first a lot with his combos. And he does threaten the takedown off the cage or out in open space. So give me Azat Maksum to get the victory here. Probably by decision. I could see this going, pretty far. Maybe that Bruno Silva fight for Tyson Nam was a bit of an anomaly or an outlier, you could say, with him getting club and subbed that way. Doesn't normally happen, but Maksum does have that one-punch knockout power that we've seen in Brave, and we've seen that in a few of his recent bouts. But should he be a minus 415 favorite is the question. When it comes to Tyson Nam's one-dimensional game, when it comes to him being 39 years old at flyweight, and when it comes to you having a 16-0 undefeated fighter, that I could see why they're juicing his line, but there's no way you should be paying minus 415 for Maksum. I do think he's a good parlay piece, but Tyson Nam has that equalizing power. He could end this guy's debut in a hurry. So the money line is a bit wide, as I mentioned, but I don't see really any clear weaknesses in the game of Azat Maksum. Even his durability, which he's dominating a lot of his performances in his 16-0 record, so you don't get a chance to see him losing. But I've seen a couple of fights where he got cracked pretty badly, stumbled, even knocked down, and he recovers very well. So his durability so far has checked out. I think he wins this fight. I'm going to say by decision for Azat Maksum. Another lightweight bout up next between Gennaro Valdez and Evan Elder. Both guys here in need of a first UFC victory. They're both 0-2 in the league. Currently, you've got the striker of brawling style, 100% finish rate. His offense is his only defense for Gennaro Valdez, the Mexican fighter who trains out of Entram Gym. And, his victory so far that we've seen under the UFC banner was on the Dana White Contender Series, where he scored a early round 2 knockout over Patrick White, who was a very untested and not the best skilled fighter from the Alaskan regional scene. And Gennaro Valdez, as if to make my point about his lack of defense, Patrick White almost knocked him out in round 1 a couple of times. And the fact that was even a back-and-forth matchup there is concerning. So Valdez follows that up with 2 losses. His debut loss to Matt Frevola, he got knocked out pretty much several times in round 1 and finally finished there. And then he followed it up getting out-grappled and controlled by Natan Levy in his second bout. So looking to pretty much finish the fight by strikes early in the match. Otherwise, he goes on to lose and slow down. But he does have a decent, I'd say him training at altitude, I think gives him a little bit of toughness and recoverability at least. So even though he's a very fast twitch, explosive guy, I think he's able to stay tough because of that cardio that he's kind of got built in from his training. Now, Evan Elder, very technical striker, very different type of fighter here, fighting out of the southpaw stance. Coming from Killcliff FC, he's 26 years old. He made a short notice debut in his spot against Preston Parsons up a weight class. Very tough spot there. He got out-grappled, but he showed resiliency and tenacity, not tapping to any of the, 10 different arm triangle attempts from Preston Parsons. Evan Elder took that all the way to a decision loss. Went back down to his native 155-pound weight class last time against Nazim Sadykhov as an underdog. Sadykhov, a very fast starter, explosive striker, but Evan Elder stayed technical, actually turned the tables on Sadykhov and knocked him down, and won rounds 1 and rounds 2, but he got hit by a knee in round 3, and the cut was so severe that he lost via TKO instantly. So Evan Elder, you can put asterisks next to both of his performances and losses so far in the UFC. I think he's the rightful favorite here. Should he be a minus 300 favorite to the plus 250 Valdez? Probably not, since he's just so unproven at this level, and Valdez is a dangerous guy. But just the technical ability, the athleticism from Evan Elder, him being able to stick and move on the outside, and as long as he survives round 1, he's a very good kicker too. He can use that to maintain distance. I think he can get the fight to the mat as well, and use some of that budding wrestling skill. I think is just going to be more than Valdez is even ready for. So good cardio, proven toughness, young and improving, and just a better technical skill set. Give me Evan Elder to win here. But my hot take on this matchup is it might not be as juice to the unders in reality as I think it is on the sports books. I think it's like plus 240, plus 260 to go the distance. I don't think that's such a bad bet here. Evan Elder needs to be technical and play a safe fight in order to get his first UFC win. Otherwise, he might get sent packing. And Genaro Valdez is a guy who's pretty resilient and tough, as I mentioned. He might be able to stick in there against Evan Elder, who's not the most dangerous guy in the world. So the over 1.5, the over 2.5 even, these are going to be spots at plus money. I might be looking to take a stab on this weekend. But overall, give me Evan Elder to get either a late stoppage or a decision win. Welterweight match up next. We've got the returning Jack Della Maddelena taking on a debuting Basel Hafez, who's from CFFC and the Fury FC regional promotions. And Jack Della finally getting another fight here. He was supposed to fight Sean Brady last week, supposed to fight Josiah Harrell last week. Harrell had a serious medical condition and got pulled the day before the card. But Jack Della, still in Las Vegas, gets a pretty good test here in Basel Hafez. I think it's a better test than Josiah Harrell would have been, to be honest with you. Basel Hafez, former Fury FC and CFFC champion at 170. Very strong grappler, high-level BJJ black belt, and he does have power in his hands that he's displayed. Coming off of the heels of his first knockout victory in his record, a one-punch, I think it was a lead check right hook over Evan Cutts. So, not bad. That was in round 3 as well. But overall, Basel Hafez is a very explosive fighter who does his best work in round 1. He swings a big overhand right, which finds its mark and can knock people down. But he is so ill at ease to strike compared to grapple that he does sometimes blow opportunities to get TKO stoppages by jumping on the neck of his opponents, looking for submissions, and then sometimes ends up on the bottom and goes on to have a sketchy split decision result. He does have a draw in his record, a split draw to fellow grappler Jeremiah Wells a couple of years ago. Largely a stalemate with the grappling back and forth, but a pretty impressive performance there. And he did fight and narrowly beat Anthony Ivy, who's a former UFC champion. I think he went 0-2 in the UFC, but again, that's a spot there in that matchup. Watch that matchup with Anthony Ivy and Basel Hafez. Hafez drops him in like 9 seconds with an overhand right that I've been talking about. Could easily have TKO'd him, but he jumps on a neck for a rear naked choke. He jumps for like a sort of a flying triangle on the mat, loses position, ends up in submission danger himself. So just a lot of kind of low fight IQ mistakes. Just lack of confidence in his striking, I think. So Jack Della, not going to have those problems. He's a very high IQ fighter, very fluid striker out of both stances, 14-2 record, most of them stoppages, and he's 4-0 in the UFC, all round 1 results. So Jack Della at 26 years old, going to be a massive favorite here as expected, but not as big of a favorite as over Josiah Harrell. Right now you can get Jack Della for minus 550 to minus 600. Basel Hafez around that plus 400, plus 450 underdog price. And I will say this, I think Hafez has a good skill set, but I think it's limited to that early part of round 1. If he can get a takedown, he's got decent wrestling, good top control, and advances well. That slow, patient, high-level BJJ transitions to mount and to dominant positions on a strong back take that he loves to get. But, that power fades, his hand speed fades very, very quickly, and his takedowns become very desperate and kind of telegraphed as the fight goes on. So not the best cardio. As this goes down the stretch, Jack Della can just mind his P's and Q's early, which I think he'll be fine to do. and then he can take over late round 1 or even into round 2 if it goes there. So maybe the over 1.5 might be a sneaky contrarian play in a Jack Della fight, but I will take him to win another inside the distance knockout against Basel Hafez. So Hafez, I think he's going to have some success in the UFC, just not against this level of competition. Give me Jack Della inside the distance by knockout. Featherweight bout up next between Austin Lingo and Melquizael Costa, two guys in their 20s that are looking to right the wrongs of their last fight where they both suffered a round 2 submission loss. For Austin Lingo, who's more of a one-dimensional boxing style of fighter, 29 years old, he's a very pressure-forward, aggressive striker nonetheless. But he's coming off of that loss to Nate Landwehr back in March, where he got basically ground out. After starting strong, as he normally does in round 1, he got ground out, taken down in round 2, and submitted by the very tenacious and talented Nate Landwehr as expected, cashing a big plus money number for us on that round 2 sub that night. So I thank him for that. But Melquizael Costa, he had a very tough matchup too. It was a short notice debut against Thiago Moises. So a strong wrestler in Thiago Moises and a very strong grappler, able to grind him down for the majority of that fight and tap him out at the end of round 2. Not a representation of Melquizael Costa's well-rounded game plan, though. A guy who fought most recently before the UFC in the LFA, where he scored a round 3 very impressive knockout over Junior Mello in that bout. And Melquizael Costa's big for the weight class. Both men here are 5'10" at 145. And Costa has that awesome technical southpaw striking style, good Muay Thai, and very impressive combinations that hit accurately. He mixes in his knees and kicks with his combinations up top. And, even in the clinch when he's doing good work with the knees, off the clinch break, he'll then come down and land with boxing combinations. Just a very hard to prepare for style. He has different strikes in every combination and throws in clusters. And he's a good finisher, too. 7 knockouts and 6 submissions over his 19 wins. A lot of pro experience for Costa, who does have 8 round 1 stoppages as well. So power early, power late, and a good grappling game offensively as well. Defensively, that's usually what gets him into trouble. Obviously, his loss to Thiago Moises, but even in the LFA, he lost to Italo Gomez, largely by getting, he got the better of Gomez on the feet, but he got out-grappled in 2 of those rounds and lost. So still shoring up that part of his game. His takedown defense is not going to be tested against the boxer in Austin Lingo. And Lingo has had trouble with guys who start fast, right? He had trouble with Luis Saldana back in 2021, I think that was. He got hurt to the body and to the head in round 1, but Luis Saldana doesn't have the cardio to keep going in round 2 and round 3, and that's where Lingo was able to take over and win that decision. But Costa has very good cardio. I've noticed that about him. Like I said, power early, power late, and even when he's mixing and grappling, still, he can do it all and have very good pop on his punches later in the fight. So I love this fight for Costa. I think he could win a striking battle. I think he could win, of course, a grappling match as well. So a lot of ways to win. He's a minus 200 favorite here, but I took that price tag for 2 units. I think he gets his hand raised here, and I think he does it probably inside the distance by knockout, I would say, somewhere within 2 rounds. I think he gets Lingo out of there. So, again, 2 units at minus 200 for Costa. Very confident in this young kid to start his winning ways in the UFC this Saturday. Women's strawweight bout up next. A pretty easy fight to break down between Estela Nunes and Victoria Dudakova. We've got the striker, the Brazilian Muay Thai fighter, Estela Nunes, making her 4th walk to the cage and still looking for her first win in the octagon. She's gone 0-3 against the grappler, Ariane Carnelosi. She lost by submission. Again, a generalist, but a wrestler in Sam Hughes, who was able to take her down in round 2 and round 3, get the close decision win. And she fought the dangerous striker in Yasmin Jauregui at the end of last year. And after dropping Jauregui in round 1 early on, she then slowed down and got knocked out herself in round 2. So Estela Nunes, fairly one-dimensional with her Muay Thai. Good 2-3 combinations, some good kicks to maintain distance. And she's pretty accurate, moving forward or backward. Even when she's retreating, she can still land on the face of grapplers like Carnelosi or fighters like Sam Hughes stalking the takedown. But in round 2 and round 3, that explosiveness, the danger, and her susceptibility to getting taken down really goes through the roof. And she usually drops the ball as she has. So Against Victoria Dudakova, who's a Russian debuting grappler off the Contender Series and only 24 years old, Dudakova has a very strong wrestling game. She's a very good athlete, a lifelong athlete, and very physically strong. Although she is fairly new to mixed martial arts, like 5 years in training altogether. 6-0 amateur, 6-0 as a professional so far. She's got a good body lock trip takedown, good cage wrestling. She can make mistakes there and end up on bottom, which is always a worry. But even out in open space, I think she'll be landing double leg takedowns on Nunes in this fight. And off the Contender Series, she even injured her knee in that fight against Maria Silva. But she came through winning 2-1 using the grappling as a big dog in that fight. So she got the contract. And she's young and improving. I think she's got a lot of athletic potential here to keep on polishing up her striking, which right now is kind of just to distract her opponents from when she's going to get the takedown. But I think the striking will come a long way, and so will those mistakes in the clinch with her wrestling. So give me Dudakova. I think it's a very good stylistic matchup for her to just get some ground time and look for the submission, which she could probably lock up in the end of the fight the way that Carnelossi did in Nunes' first UFC fight. So Dudakova has to just basically mind her manners early, not get hit too harshly. And as long as she's not getting knocked out in round 1, I think she should go on to cruise in round 2 and round 3. So either a late submission for Dudakova or a decision win. But at minus 200, I'm not going to trust her in this matchup. I'd feel very silly if she gasses out or stops, maybe Estela Nunes out of nowhere can start stuffing takedowns for the majority of the round. I'd feel very foolish laying minus 200 on Dudakova, but that's just how I see this fight. I'm very skeptical of debuting fighters with their undefeated records young. So give me Dudakova to win here by decision. Featherweight bout up next between Tucker Lutz and Melsik Baghdasaryan. A very fun dynamic here, of course. Tucker Lutz, the wrestler. You've got Melsik, the dangerous striker with his kickboxing weapons out of the southpaw stance. So it's going to be who can employ the majority of their game plan the longest to win this fight. Tucker Lutz looking to take the fight to the mat, but usually he tests his striking early in the round, throwing very fundamental boxing techniques, throwing leg kicks, and finding his range, and then eventually rotating to that wrestling-oriented game plan where he just looks for top control and rains down ground and pound. He's very good at getting the takedown against the cage, slamming his opponents to the mat, and then doing work from there. But he is coming off of a round 2 submission loss at the hands of Daniel Pineda, who Tucker Lutz was a big favorite over that night. But he did fall victim once again to Pineda's 100% finish rate that continues. And it was, I think, a round 2 guillotine, but he did hurt Tucker Lutz on the feet in round 1. He knocked him down once or twice and clearly did the better work all throughout that fight. So Tucker Lutz has a lot to make up for here, but Melsik is also coming off of a round 2 submission loss at the hands of Josh Kulabau earlier this year in February. But Melsik was dominating that fight in round 1, busting up the nose of Josh Kulabau, using his range to maintain distance and not get taken down. And it was like I think he slipped after getting hit by a jab from Josh Kulabau, who then jumped all over the neck of Melsik and locked up a very quick, crafty submission in round 2. So it was more of a momentary, like a moment of weakness, a moment where Melsik just made a mistake versus Tucker Lutz's last performance where he was outclassed pretty much the whole time. So yeah, I went into the tape study thinking Tucker Lutz was going to be a great underdog here to pick and possibly back with my money. That was when he was a plus 175 underdog. And before I dove into the tape and looked at this closer, I'm more confident in Melsik Baghdasaryan's ability to nullify damage when it does get taken down to the mat and have done the better striking work and more impactful damage before it got to that point. So I'm going to call Melsik to either get an early knockout, as he's one to do with his snappy kicks that people don't see coming, or more likely get a decision win just off of the impact and damage of his strikes versus whatever control time Tucker Lutz was able to gain in the match. And now that the money line is tightened up, I feel more confident in picking Melsik here. I just think he's the better fighter. He seems a little bit more athletic and faster. I don't rate much from Tucker Lutz's striking. I think Melsik is way, way better, and I think it'll actually make Lutz very hesitant to try to find those moments to close the distance because he'll be met with all of those flashy kicks of Baghdasaryan in the matchup. So probably no bet on this fight, although it does look a little bit more bettable on the Melsik side at this point. But give me Melsik to win by a more damage-based decision here. Lightweight bout up next between Terrence McKinney and Nazim Sadykhov, two guys who are in their late 20s, big for the weight class at 5'10", and they both are fast starters with serious knockout power and finishing potential at the weight class. So a lot of similarities to be drawn here between these two, but Terrence McKinney, originally a wrestler, but he's turned into this explosive striker. He's trading losses and wins in his last 4 UFC appearances, making his 6th walk to the cage this Saturday, coming off of that round 2 flying knee knockout at the hands of Ismail Bonfim this past January, where Terrence McKinney looked a little bit gun-shy, a little bit hesitant in round 1 to engage the technical, well-rounded fighter in Gabriel Bonfim. So that's to be expected. It was a fight over in Brazil as well, but we're going to see how McKinney can recover after now having a second knockout loss in under 1.5 rounds, a taste of his own medicine. Hopefully his confidence is not taking a hit in these matchups, because this is just the style that Terrence McKinney has chosen for himself. He lays it all on the line for round 1, doesn't leave a lot for the rest of the fight. In fact, out of his 18 professional fights, 17 have finished under 1.5 rounds, the majority in round 1. And the majority, he's coming out the victor. But when he faces these guys like Drew Dober, who are durable to take his early onslaught, they can turn the tables on him pretty quickly and knock him out. And likewise with Ismail Bonfim, just a more technical fighter, ready for whatever Terrence is going to throw his way. He countered Terrence viciously in round 1 and then found the read on the flying knee after hurting him in round 2. So I think these upper echelon guys Terrence McKinney's going to fall victim to most of the time, but as an underdog like he is on this Saturday's card, I think he's good to back as a dog but not as a favorite. And against these lower level green guys like Nazim Sadykhov, making a second walk to the cage, who's never really faced that kind of power and early aggression of a Terrence McKinney, I think he might struggle here. So Nazim Sadykhov is a southpaw striker training with the Sarah Longo team, so he probably does have some good anti-wrestling in his pocket, but he's largely a striker coming off of that round 3 TKO stoppage over Evan Elder, who we spoke about earlier. Now, Sadykhov did get hurt in that matchup, and he lost rounds 1 and rounds 2, but he bailed himself out, scoring a knee that opened up a giant cut over the eye of Evan Elder, giving Sadykhov the win. So he's got an 8-1 professional record so far. He can be held against the cage and stalemated there in some spots, and he can be a little bit one at a time with his striking in some matches, some. But his boxing is very crisp. He's very sharp with fast hand speed and knockout power. And on the Contender Series, he scored a round 3 knockout over Ahmad Hassanzada after doing serious work to all targets of the body early in the match. So, this guy is not really held captive to just a round 1 or under 1.5 round knockout threat, which I like. And I'm going to like that with a lot of guys against Terrence McKinney, guys that can, what happens when the going gets tough? Are they going to fold? Is their cardio going to hold up? At the higher level, you have to worry about these things. But for McKinney in this matchup, I think he's going to confidently pressure with his tall stance, his flat-footed style, and overwhelm Nazim Sadykhov early with strikes, and possibly even take him down. We've seen Terrence McKinney employ that against Faraz Ziyam. He went for the takedown, grabbed the leg, and got the back take and submission early. And he did the same thing against, Eric Gonzalez. Jumped on his back and got the submission. So potentially that is live for Terrence McKinney, not just having a striking battle, but using the grappling as well, I think would be smart. So give me Terrence McKinney as an underdog, under 1.5 rounds here, win or lose, but I think he gets the finish under 1.5 rounds once again. Another lightweight matchup between two finishers in Atman Azaitar and Francisco Prado. Just like the last matchup we talked about with Terrence McKinney and Nazim Sadykhov, I'm surprised that Atman Azaitar, with the more experience on his resume, fighting in Brave CF, having a few more fights in the UFC. Just like Terrence McKinney was the more experienced man in his fight, Atman Azaitar similarly finds himself as the underdog here at plus 105, whereas the newcomer Francisco Prado, making his second walk to the cage, finds himself the slight favorite. And Francisco Prado, just to draw similarity to Nazim Sadykhov in the last fight we spoke on, I think Prado might be able to be the more successful man if this does get dragged out past 1.5 rounds, but I think that's highly unlikely here. Atman Azaitar, 13 wins professionally, 10 knockouts, 2 submissions, nearly 100% finish rate, whereas Francisco Prado, 11 wins, 5 of them knockouts, 6 submissions. So he's got 100% finish rate in all of his wins. Both guys rarely see past, the halfway mark of a 3-round fight. Azaitar has 10 round 1 finishes in total, including 2 in the UFC over Teemu Packalén and Kama Worthy, which aren't the most impressive wins at this point in 2023, but at the time, very violent and very impressive the way he did those. He strikes very well, he feints well, decent head movement and hand speed, and he's able to, really succeed in the firefights that are in phone booth range, like nose to nose, throwing looping strikes. He can come out the victor of those. He's very durable. Although he is coming off of his first professional loss by knockout to Matt Frevola, coming back from a long layoff. So Matt Frevola's on a roll right now, super powerful and a high-level guy. I won't hold that against Azaitar, but his powerful striking is not a game plan that's going to last more than a round 1 affair. So if he tries to chase the finish on Prado, who ends up being somehow very durable, I could see Azaitar getting finished, in the next part of round 2 and not making it to the scorecard. So no matter who wins here, I think it's under 1.5 rounds. I am going to lean on the side of Azaitar. I think he is just slightly better. He's more experienced. He's 12 years older at 33 years old, but still in his prime. And he's the most dangerous fighter that Francisco Prado has faced by far. Prado's coming out of the Argentinian regional scene, fighting people out of Samurai Fight House that we spoke on earlier, breaking down the Eileen Perez fight. And Prado does maybe have a more well-rounded game. He's got the submissions. He can get the fight to the mat, flatten people out with ground and pound, and try to take their back for their RNC. But, Francisco Prado, I just think at this age, he's a little outmatched here experience-wise. And again, this is a very big step up in competition from a guy in Jamie Malarkey who's well-rounded but not the most dangerous guy. He opted to have a low-output affair and use his wrestling. Azaitar is going to confidently and recklessly take risks and step forward and swing at the chin of Francisco Prado. I don't know if he's ready for that. So give me the plus money side in Azaitar, and I'm going to say he gets a round 1 knockout. But I do like the bets. Instead of taking a side, I like the under 1.5, and I like the under 2.5. Even if it is a bit chalky, I think that's a good parlay piece or even something to play straight because I think it is a very likely result. Women's featherweight bout up next between Norma Dumont and Chelsea Chandler. 2 women coming off of wins, squaring off at 145, a division which suits both of them since they would have a heck of a time making 135. They're both pretty physically imposing. Norma Dumont, 5'7", and Chelsea Chandler, 5'8.5". And both women have pretty solid boxing, which is how they do a lot of their better work in the cage. Chelsea Chandler, more of a slow, plodding southpaw striker, swinging that lead right hook like a baseball bat, and it finds its mark. It's pretty devastating, but her left straight is very thudding as well. And Julia Stoliarenko found that out last time in October in Chelsea Chandler's debut. She got a round 1 TKO stoppage on Stoliarenko, avoiding Julia's submission threat early, and Chelsea Chandler found herself in top position on the mat, made her way to mount, and rained down ground and pound for the stoppage in round 1. A pretty impressive debut for the 29-year-old out of Stockton, California's Cesar Gracie, where she's a purple belt in BJJ as well. So a decent, well-rounded foundation of skills for Chelsea Chandler. Strong on the cage, physically imposing, and all 5 of her pre-UFC bouts were in Invicta. Norma Dumont, she's a solid boxer and has been lording over this 145-pound division in the UFC. I think she's had the most bouts here and the most wins in this division, only losing her debut to Megan Anderson by knockout and losing more of a clinch-based wrestling affair to Macy Chiasson, who took her down 6 out of 12 attempts last year. So Norma Dumont, she's coming off of that win 2-1 over Carol Hossa, which was kind of an uncharacteristically low output performance for both women in round 1. A cage stalling back and forth, which Dumont won in round 2. And then Dumont got hurt and dropped in round 3, but she still won the bout 29-28. So, Dumont, she's got a well-rounded skill set as well, largely using the boxing. She's got fast hands and fast feet. She can move laterally, stick and move, and just land the better strikes and output over 3 rounds. But she can mix it up and go for the wrestling as well, as she showed over the one-dimensional 39-year-old boxer Danielle Wolf last year. So Dumont can adapt. She's got a lot of good experience. She's got solid cardio over 3 rounds. And those are my questions against Chelsea Chandler, right? Like, I see Chandler's got power. She's got some good ground skills. But Is her cardio going to hold up over 3 rounds? Will that power threat go away? I think so. She's already a little bit slow in plotting, and even towards the end of round ones, Chelsea Chandler's hand speed is very, very slow. I think Norma Dumont can kind of dance around and counter around those slow thudding strikes, being a little bit lighter on her feet. But again, Chelsea Chandler's durability is a bit of a question mark as well. Will she be able to absorb damage okay, or will she kind of lose that desire to continue and compete if she gets teed off on in round 1? So there's a lot of question marks here. The money line is close. There's minus 140, the favorite for Dumont, plus 120 for the newcomer Chelsea Chandler. I'm going to side with Dumont to get a decision win here and do the better work over 3 rounds, even if she does drop that round 1 to Chelsea Chandler's aggression early. But again, I just think Dumont's the faster fighter here who can compete more consistently over a 3-round effort. But I would not at all be surprised if Chelsea Chandler pulls off the upset here as an underdog. I think she's got a lot of potential, a well-rounded game, and I think she seems to really be motivated to want to be successful here. But just nothing I want to put my money for or against. I want to learn about where she's at in this matchup against Dumont. Then I'll know how to bet next time. So give me Dumont by decision. Heavyweight bout up next between Josh Parisian and the returning Walt Harris, who comes back to the UFC after over 2 years out of the game. And both of these guys are very heavy-handed strikers, headhunters even, and they finish the majority of their bouts. Josh Parisian and Walt Harris, both very big, even for heavyweight, weighing in towards the end of that weight limit at 265 or 266. And they're both pretty tall, 6'4" for Parisian, who's 34, and Walt Harris at 6'5", who finds himself at 40 years old at this point, still able to work with that age at heavyweight. And it's not like he's jumping back into the high end of the talent pool where he left off 2 years ago. Walt Harris is riding into this fight on a 3-fight losing streak, all by knockout at the hands of Marcin Tybura, most recently Volkov before that, and Alistair Overeem before that. So he's a guy who's got 13 professional wins, 10 losses, and 1 no contest. The 1 no contest was actually his 1 decision win, which was over Andrei Arlovski some years ago. But otherwise, his 13 victories that still stand in his record, all of them knockouts. Walt Harris has a very fast hand speed and very powerful combinations when he smells blood and swarms, with usually leading things off with that lead right southpaw hook, and then following up from there. He can melt fighters against the cage, mix in knees up close with his boxing combinations to end the fight in a hurry. And he's finished a lot of good fighters. I mean, at least notable ones. Chase Sherman, Sergey Spivak, that aged pretty well. Even Alexei Oleinik, within a few seconds, he knocked him out. So, look, I think Walt Harris is a level above Josh Parisian, even still, if he's a reduced version of where he was. And I think he knocks Josh Parisian out within 1 round. The problem is that Walt Harris was a minus 200 favorite. I wasn't thrilled about that. And even at minus 160 where it's moved to, I'm not thrilled about that price tag either. I'd want to find some way to get plus money on Harris by combining his win with his knockout prop with his, under 1.5 rounds. If you combined all of those somehow, or just Harris in round 1, maybe you'd find a way to get this closer to even money. Maybe not. Maybe the sports books are keen on that. I'll have to check, but I'll probably just stay off of this fight in general. You could play the unders if you're trying to cover both sides, but I don't think Parisian is all that dangerous at the UFC level. Guys like Tybura, Volkov, Overeem, these guys are going to make you pay if you slow down and fail to get them out of there in round 1, and they did. But Josh Parisian is a guy who I don't think will, right? I mean, unless Walt Harris really, really gasses out, and it looks like Josh Parisian versus Alain Baudot, if that would be a really sad sight, but that is a possibility. Then I could see Parisian getting like a referee mercy stoppage due to ground strikes. But I just don't. I could see this if Walt Harris fails to take Josh Parisian out of there, or for some reason play a patient game. I could see him surviving even if he's losing in rounds 2 and rounds 3. I don't think Parisian's all that dangerous is my point. So just not fast enough with his hand speed. I know Parisian paused the jab out there, looks for the big overhand, but he's very sloppy, doesn't move his head all that well, and he keeps his hands pretty low. I think Walt Harris bum rushes him early, knocks him out, and shows he's a level above even after the long layoff, even at 40 years old. So I know Walt Harris, he did have a bunch of family issues. His daughter got abducted and murdered, and that kind of started that whole 3-fight losing knockout streak against him. But again, I think even if those family problems didn't come up for Walt Harris, all that tragedy didn't happen, I think he still would have probably lost those fights just from being kind of round one or bust. So give me Walt Harris, round one knockout over Josh Parisian. Not the most confident to put my money behind this fight, but I do think he's a level above Josh. Middleweight bout up next between Albert Duraev and Julian Park in the co-main event. I think this fight could be pretty competitive. It might be entertaining, it might not be, but we've got two guys who do their better work when they employ the wrestling game plan. Julian Park coming off of 3 back-to-back wins, his previous 2 being very simple submission wins over Dennis Tululin and Joseph Holmes. So this will represent a step back up in competition against Duraev. Whereas for Albert Duraev, I think Julian Park is a less dangerous matchup than he's been faced with in his last 2 fights, which was a split decision win over Chidi Njokuani this year and a round 2 doctor stoppage at the hands of Joaquin Buckley, who swolled his eyes shut and outstruck him back in their fight last year. So Albert Duraev has not been very impressive to me the way I thought he was going to be in the UFC. He came in with a much closer fight than it should have been against Roman Kopylov, and Albert Duraev did not show good cardio in that matchup. And then again against Joaquin Buckley, cardio seemed to fail him as the fight got tough. I just don't think Albert Duraev has what it takes to either strike a high output 3-round fight or wrestle a 3-round fight for that matter. So the simplest path to victory for Duraev is, of course, rinse and repeating takedowns early in this matchup, gaining the respect of Julian Park and getting him off of his feet. And I think he could do it. Eric Anders recently was able to take down Park a few times. Gregory Rodriguez able to do that with some pretty simple single leg takedown and trips. I think Duraev has what it takes to do that early, but I think he's got to get the best work out of the way in this matchup while he still has the gas tank to do so, and do the better work in round 1, and then again in round 2, and then maybe he does fall apart in round 3, but I don't think Julian Park is the most dangerous guy to get him out of there at that point in the fight. So, Julian Park does smell blood, and he does like to put boxing combinations together when he does see his opponent slowing down, but, that killer instinct, it didn't really pay off against Gregory Rodriguez. He did get himself knocked out in that fight. But I think Park does have the better ability to utilize a jab and simple combinations that could put output on the board for him in this fight. So a durable wrestle boxer in Julian Park. This guy, again, very close back and forth fight with Eric Anders. Arguably could have lost that fight, but now he's had 2 pretty easy opponents in his previous fights here. This is a close fight. I like the fight goes to decision and the overs in this bout. I think they're pretty affordable on the money line, like minus 130 for the over 2.5. You got the durable Julian Park. You've got Duraev, who somehow works through that fatigue, even if he's losing. But overall, I think Duraev as an underdog does have the simpler way to win this fight. And like I said, it's rinse and repeating takedowns. I can't trust him with my money to be urgent with that game plan because he hasn't been. He showed urgency against Chidi in round 1 with the takedowns. I then opted to have a low output striking back and forth for rounds two and rounds 3 and almost lost the fight. So I can't put my money behind Albert Duraev, but I do think he wins this fight. But I think it's a close fight, and I think it could possibly be a split decision. I saw BetOnline actually dropped the fight goes to split at plus 300. So I must be on point with that analysis because normally that's around like plus 450 as a default. But with these guys' propensity to be in close fights, I think the bookies are going to be all over that. But if I can find a sports book that has like plus 450 for fight goes to split, I'll definitely put like maybe a quarter unit on that. But I might be on the fight goes to decision as well. Have to look into this fight a bit more, but give me the underdog and Albert Duraev to do the better work in rounds 1 and rounds 2. Okay, we made it all the way to the main event of the Fight Night card. Hit the like, hit the subscribe, and let's break into this potential 5-round bout at women's bantamweight between the former champion Holly Holm as she takes on rising Brazilian prospect Mayra Bueno Silva. And right off the bat, I would say that both of these women are a lot more well-rounded than their resume or I think even the general public would give them credit. You've got Holly Holm, who's of course the former professional boxer. She made the switch to MMA and started her career as really like a point-fighting kickboxer in the cage, which successful enough at that. She used her physicality and long striking weapons to get the championship almost 8 years ago now over Ronda Rousey, and maintained pretty good wins in the league. But in the second half of her career, she adapted to more of a cage clinch style, even a wrestling and takedown threat style, as opposed to just being a striker. And you saw that on display in her last fight against Yana Santos, which was a domination over 3 rounds, largely getting the fight to the mat and doing work there, almost finishing by ground and pound strikes in round 2. Now, Mayra Bueno Silva on the flip side, 10 years younger, and if you look at her record, she's got 10 wins, 2 losses, 1 draw, but she only has 1 knockout. She's got 7 submissions. You would look at that and probably assume, even going off of her wins in the UFC, many of them submissions. Maybe she's just a grappler, but she's got very strong Muay Thai techniques as well. Sort of one at a time with her strikes, but they mean business when they hit. Her body work is very strong, and if you get caught on the receiving end of her punches to the face, I mean, that's respect earning right there, and then she can start working her grappling from that position, which is what she did against Lena Landsberg. I think that was one of the first times she had actually successfully completed takedowns, and Lena Landsberg in round 1 was getting eaten alive by strikes from Mayra Bueno Silva. The body work was nasty, but I will say Lena Landsberg, more of a true to her age fighter. Her footwork and just her movement is not as good as it once was. More of a stationary target that was easy for Silva to sort of eat up. Holly Holm still very light on her feet and athletic at 41 years old. And I still think she'll have a big striking edge here based on the volume. But I think Mayra Bueno Silva will have the more impactful shots. So this could be a closer fight than we initially think it would be. Holly Holm, all of the experience, only losing to like top level competition. As far as the pacing goes of this fight, I'm not sure if Mayra Bueno Silva is as finish reliant as it seems to be on paper, right? Like you would assume that Mayra Bueno Silva would have the best chance to win this fight by submission within 1 or 2 rounds. That's also the best chance of her to get the grappling success and to land the more powerful strikes to set something up when she has the most cardio early in the fight. As this goes late, of course, I favor Holly Holm's striking output, her cardio and experience in those championship rounds. And she still appears very athletic even at her age. So it's just if this does go late, if this goes all 5 rounds, could Mayra Bueno Silva win the decision? Could she have racked up enough control time, submission attempts in rounds 1 and rounds 2, landed the more impactful strikes even into round 3, and then steal that decision if it goes to 5 rounds? It's a possibility for sure. I don't think it's a highly likely one, though. And where the money line stands, I'm going to go with Holly Holm to get another decision victory here. Just do a better point fighting style. Stay safe early with just moving fast, keeping her feet moving, not getting caught as a stationary target with the big thudding Muay Thai strikes from Bueno Silva, and definitely not tying up with her on the ground early when she's the most dangerous. So Bueno Silva is very explosive with all of her movements. She does tend to slow down and fade as the fight goes on. It's just a matter of, can she bank those early 3 rounds? I think it's highly unlikely, even being 10 years younger. So give me Holly Holm. Nothing I really want to put my money behind. I don't trust her at 41. Every fight could be her last, but she does look very... she doesn't look like she's regressing all that much if you look at her last few fights against Yana Santos, Ketlin Vieira, which was a close fight, and the fight with Irina Aldana a couple years back. Very impressive 5-round fight there. You compare that to the last 3 fights from Mayra Bueno Silva. I've already torn apart Lena Landsberg as being a little bit slow and retiring that same night. The fight before that was against fellow grappler Stephanie Egger. Very quick tap by armbar that nobody saw. And then before that, a fight against Wu Yanan, who's just not a good fighter in general. So, yeah, I'm more impressed with Holly Holm. She's still only losing to upper-level competition, and she still looks like she's got a lot of gas in the tank. So give me Holly Holm by decision. I'm pretty confident, but I just don't think I'm going to get there betting-wise. The money line, I believe, is still around minus 150 for Holly Holm. That's slightly moved down. Minus 143 Holly Holm, plus 123 for Bueno Silva. Yeah, give me Holly Holm here. I'm not sure if I'll have a bet on this fight. Okay, there you have it, you guys. All the fights broken down for UFC Vegas 77. Holm versus Silva. Can't wait for this card. All things considered, I say that every week just because after doing so much research for it, even the lower tier cards with not a lot of recognizable names, it just becomes very intriguing to see how these matchups play out. So I know you guys are the same. We're all obsessed with this sport. So let's try to make some money on it just like we did last week. Dodge some landmines. Last week at UFC 290, it was big favorites. We were trying to avoid, the ones that were going to drop the ball. Did that successfully. This week, it's these untrustworthy, unproven commodities that we have to kind of dance our way around and pick the best spots we possibly can. So join me Wednesday night at 9 p.m. I'll be having my live stream talking to you guys in the chat about the betting action, but I'll also have my guy, the Monk Matician, join us to talk about DFS, which I'm not an expert in. I'm a beginner at DFS and all the DraftKings lineups nonsense. So this guy's an absolute expert on it. We're going to find some ways to compare notes, find some spots that we like, and cash out this weekend. So again, hit the like, hit the subscribe, and I'll talk to you guys then. Cheers.